When considering the term accessibility in document application or web development, what comes to mind? Common answers are often handicapped, screen reader, or voice output. Many people often feel that while they know what accessibility is, it is difficult to explain. One definition of accessibility in design is making content both understandable and navigable. This is a classic textbook definition that in theory tells us what accessible design is without elaborating on the multitude of considerations in its application. The objective of this section is to build on that definition, to develop a more complete picture and understanding of what accessibility is. This objective is aimed at an overarching goal, that by better understanding what accessibility is, you as a designer will be better able to apply accessible design principles in designing documents and websites. As we explore a more complete picture of accessibility, we will use these questions to shape our understanding. First of all, why do we use accessibility? Who uses accessibly designed texts? And finally, how do users utilize accessible products through various assistive technologies? So why do we use accessible design? Well, for one thing, it is the law. Section 508 of the United States Rehabilitation Act requires minimum accessibility standards for documents, websites, and other media products that are used in state, local, or federal forums. Now, you're more than welcome to read the entire 600 pages, or we can accept that it's in there and move on. So maybe you're the type that likes to live on the edge, and you're not into abiding the law. Well, in that case, maybe you'll buy the good karma theory, that what good you do for others comes around. In all seriousness, the standards were developed to reflect best practice for document and web design. By following accessible design principles, you're simply making text easier for everyone to use. So if you're still on the edge, let's see if we can appeal to your sense of empathy. We're going to simulate deafness, so just be sure that on the next screen So now that we've experienced what it's like to be deaf and have to complete a task, imagine on this screen what it's like to be expected to complete something that you can't see. To continue building a sense of empathy, what follows are a series of screenshots of this very same image that have been altered to demonstrate different eye disorders and how people with low vision encounter images. In all cases, these are considered mild forms of the diseases that they represent. This first image has been altered to simulate color blindness. In particular, red and green are being filtered out. While there are many forms of color blindness that can affect many different colors, red and green tend to be the most common colors of impairment. So when you have a choice of choosing colors, always try to avoid reds and greens. This image simulates the effects of a cataract. A cataract usually does not affect the field of vision, rather sharpness and fine detail are lost. Now let's look at other afflictions that cause an actual loss in the field of vision. Diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in working-age Americans. Most often, diabetic retinopathy has no symptoms until the damage to your eyes is severe. Spotty loss of vision and contrast blurriness is characteristic. Again, this would be considered a mild form of the disorder. Central field of vision loss can be due to injury or degenerative eye disease such as detached retinas or macular degeneration. The field of vision loss can vary and often gets worse over time. This image represents pinhole vision. which can be caused by injury, disease, or birth defect. Many people who experience pinhole vision have a much smaller window of vision than is presented here. This brings up a common misconception about accessible design. There is a tendency to think that by making text larger, it will be easier to see. Consider that if you have pinhole vision, larger text may be beyond your field of vision. In order to fully understand accessible design principles, we need to understand the assistive technologies that use these principles. To help us understand that, there are three scenarios that follow. The first is Chin Lee, a distant student who happens to be blind and is studying accounting. Chin Lee is also a second language learner. She uses a screen reader to interpret what is displayed on the screen, which generates both a speech output and a refreshable braille output. Being a second language learner, Chin Lee sometimes needs to check her understanding not only through the audio, but supplement it with the braille. This scenario reminds us of an important issue that's often overlooked in accessible design, and that is that many users are second language learners. Chin Lee, also being in accounting, would use a lot of tables and graphs. So her accessibility considerations would be she would need clearly marked up tables with column and row headings, and would need alternative text to understand the graphs that she's not able to see. Our second scenario is Ivan, a non-traditional student who has low vision. He has a degenerative eye condition that has led to central field of vision loss. He uses a screen magnifier to help with his vision. He finds it easier to use documents with a clear markup structure, as he can scan through the document and locate information on the magnifier screen. Using the magnifier, he is usually able to comprehend graphics. However, on small or fine detail graphics, he may supplement his understanding with alternative text. An additional issue that Ivan has is color blindness, which in his case means an inability to distinguish between green and red. This scenario, like the first, brings up the need for a clear markup structure. In the first scenario, the clear markup structure was for the assistive technology. In this case, as Ivan is using a more low-fidelity screen magnifier, it makes it easier for him to scan the document quickly to find the section he's looking for. Ivan also needs alternative text on small graphics, and Ivan points to the importance of a careful color selection, as we mentioned earlier, avoiding reds and greens whenever possible. Our third scenario is Ryan, a student with deaf blindness. Specifically, she has low vision and is deaf. She uses a screen magnifier to enlarge text to a font size that she can read. When screen magnification is not sufficient, she also uses a screen reader. On the next screen, you're going to be asked to list some considerations that would need to be taken into account for a user such as Ryan. Hopefully some of the considerations you came up with was that this particular user demonstrates users that are limited by use of more than one sense. That in this case, the screen reader needed to provide a braille output, as an audio output would not be sufficient as the user is deaf. An additional consideration can be that using devices such as braille output devices run very slowly, causing the user to take a much longer time to comprehend the text or graphics. These three scenarios are not intended to represent all accessibility-dependent users. Rather, they help demonstrate the wide variety of considerations that must be taken into account when applying accessible design. Considerations such as that users may not be able to see, hear, move, or may not even be able to process some types of information. Users may have difficulty reading text. Users may have limited or no use of keyboards or mice. Users may have a text-only screen. Users may be using a slow assistive device. And users may be second language learners. The goal of accessible design is to take those many considerations into account. The World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, is an international community that develops such standards. Their efforts have been directed towards developing minimum standards of accessibility that can be applied to document and website design. The hope is that these standards can be adopted across the software industry, and many software leaders have already done so. These efforts have led to a principle known as graceful transition. At the very minimum, graceful transition requires clear markup structure, alternative text for graphics, the creation of documents that work even when the user cannot see or hear, the creation of documents that do not rely on any one type of hardware or assistive technology. Graceful transition then allows information to seamlessly apply to assistive technologies. In summary, accessible design is achieved when content is both understandable and navigable to all users. Accessibility principles must take into account a number of different disabilities, assistive technologies, and situations. Graceful transition sets the standards for accessible design across the software industry to make assistive technology beneficial to all users. The first step in building accessible design is using a clear markup structure. If you're using Microsoft Word, this has become very easy as it has in many software packages. It simply uses the style sheets already built into the software to communicate different sections to assistive technology. The objective here is to use Microsoft Word and the tools already within it to implement a clear document structure. There really isn't anything you need to know other than how to use Microsoft Word, which you probably already do. This is a very easy thing to do. So my sample document about volcanoes, I simply want to make sure that the screen reader and the portable braille output or someone using a screen magnifier can easily identify the different sections. So I'm simply going to identify this as the title, and using the style sheets, simply choose title. And if I look down through the document, I see one section about what are volcanoes and the nature of volcanoes. So I'm going to designate those as headings. And I come to a third section, which I will designate with a heading. And in this section, I notice that there are two subsections. And so I'm going to denote those using heading 2 so that assistive technology will identify that those are separate sections. And that really is all there is to creating a clear markup structure. It's something that should be done on any document just to make it easier for everyone to use, and it certainly helps those using assistive technology.